Arizona is spending billions of dollars on a water crisis they cannot fix because the water is gone. Pumped dry decades ago, and nobody told the 5 million people living there. This is happening right now across Arizona. Families are walking away from their homes, not because of money problems or job losses, but because their taps have literally run dry and there's no water left to find. And here's the part that makes no sense. Arizona is spending millions of dollars trying to fix this crisis, drilling deeper wells, building new pipelines, paying for water infrastructure. But the problem just keeps getting worse. Because you can throw all the money in the world at this problem, but you cannot buy water that simply does not exist. And Arizona is running out fast. Let me show you just how bad this has gotten. Phoenix is the 5th largest city in America. Over 5 million people live in the greater metro area. And state officials just confirmed something terrifying. There is not enough groundwater to support the people already living there. The numbers are staggering. Arizona has allocated water for homes and farms that need 4.86 million acre-feet of groundwater over the next 100 years. That's 1.6 trillion gallons. But here's the problem. That water doesn't exist. It was never there to begin with. The state sold water rights to developers and farmers for groundwater that was already gone. And now thousands of families are finding out the hard way. In 2023, Arizona did something unprecedented. They halted thousands of new housing developments around Phoenix, not because they ran out of land, but because they finally admitted there's no water left to support more growth. Think about that for a second. We're talking about the desert Southwest, a place where people have known for decades that water is scarce, and they're only now admitting they've been building cities on promises they couldn't keep. But the crisis isn't just about future developments. It's about people living there right now. People who bought homes, raised families, built their entire lives, only to watch their wells go dry one by one. Let me tell you about Rio Verde Foothills. This is an affluent community just north of Scottsdale. Beautiful desert homes. Median home price, $825,000. These aren't poor people struggling to make ends meet. In January 2023, these wealthy homeowners learned that money means absolutely nothing without water. The city of Scottsdale cut off their water supply completely. Over 700 households were left stranded overnight. Imagine living in an $800,000 home, and suddenly you have no running water, no showers, no toilets, no drinking water. Just expensive desert property that became completely worthless in a single day. The community scrambled for solutions. They started hauling water in trucks, paying $80 to $135 per month for 3,000 gallons. That's barely enough for one person. Most families need way more than that. So Arizona came up with a fix, a $12 million water infrastructure project. Sounds good. Finally solving the problem, right? Not even close. Because here's what that $12 million actually bought them. The cost for residents didn't go down. It went up, way up. Under the new system, they now pay $75 per month just for service, plus $16.28 for every 1,000 gallons they use. Let me break that down for you. The average household uses 6,000 gallons per month. Under this new system, that's over $6,000 per year just for water. That's more than most people's mortgage payments. And if you're a new homeowner trying to move into the area, you have to pay a $24,000 hookup fee just for the privilege of accessing water. That's on top of your down payment and closing costs. Meanwhile, nearby Scottsdale residents pay $1.65 per 1,000 gallons. Rio Verde homeowners are paying almost 10 times more for the exact same water, because they built homes where water infrastructure was never meant to exist. But wait, it gets worse. This $12 million solution isn't even permanent. It's a temporary fix that won't be fully operational until at least 2026. And even when it's done, they can only support 150 additional homes. To keep the community running until then, they had to negotiate water leases from tribal nations. That cost $250,000 per year, plus transportation costs, plus treatment costs. All of that just to delay the inevitable. And Rio Verde Foothills is just one small community. The crisis extends across the entire state, from the wealthiest suburbs to farming communities that have existed for generations. Nobody is safe from what's coming. Let's talk about the Colorado River. This is the lifeline for Arizona. Millions of people depend on it. Farms depend on it. Cities depend on it. And Arizona just lost 18% of its allocation. That's 512,000 acre-feet. Gone. Every single year. That's 167 billion gallons of water that Arizona used to count on. 30% of the Central Arizona project's normal supply just vanished. Farmers in Pinal County are being devastated. Many farms are running on groundwater now, except that groundwater is disappearing too. Some farms have just shut down completely, because there's nothing left to pump. Lake Mead and Lake Powell are the reservoirs that hold Colorado River water. Combined, they're sitting at 37% capacity. That's not a typo. More than 60% of the water that should be there is just gone. The federal government threw $1.2 billion at conservation agreements, trying to save 3 million acre-feet of water through 2026. Experts say it won't matter. A few wet years can't fix 2 decades of mega drought. The Colorado River used to flow with 18 to 20 million acre-feet annually. Now it delivers barely half that, around 10 to 11 million acre-feet. And that number keeps dropping as the climate gets hotter and drier. Now let me show you what happens when industrial agriculture meets a desert aquifer. Welcome to Willcox in Cochise County. This is ground zero for Arizona's groundwater depletion, and the numbers will blow your mind. Between 1940 and 2015, farmers pumped 5.7 million acre-feet of water from the ground. That's nearly double what Arizona receives from the Colorado River in wet years. Enough water for 15 million homes. They transformed the Sonoran Desert into vast fields of alfalfa and pecan orchards, all irrigated with groundwater from an aquifer that's collapsing beneath their feet. And nobody stopped them because Arizona law basically allows unlimited pumping. The consequences are everywhere you look. Highway signs warn drivers about earth fissures, massive cracks in the ground, where the aquifer has collapsed. Homeowners' wells have gone completely dry. The land itself is literally sinking. The aquifer has been drawn down 400 feet below average well depth. Residents report their well levels dropping 2 feet between just 2023 and 2024 alone. That's in a single year. The mega drought eliminated natural aquifer recharge. Rain used to seep into the ground and refill the aquifer slowly over time, but there's no rain anymore. So every gallon pumped out is gone forever, never coming back. And here's where the story gets absolutely infuriating. There's a company called Fondo Monte. They're owned by Saudi Arabia, and what they're doing in Arizona should be illegal. But somehow it's not. In 2023 alone, Fondo Monte pumped 31,196 acre-feet of groundwater. That's enough water for over 90,000 Arizona homes. Homes where actual people live and need water to survive. What are they using all that water for? Growing alfalfa in the desert. Crops that get shipped back to Saudi Arabia to feed cattle. Because Saudi Arabia banned alfalfa cultivation in their own country. Want to guess why? Because it depleted their water supplies. Saudi Arabia realized growing alfalfa in the desert was destroying their aquifers, so they banned it at home. Then came to Arizona and started doing the exact same thing here. Fondo Monte operates 30 wells. Some drill more than 1,500 feet deep. They can extract up to 64,000 gallons per minute. They use over 80% of the Rane Gras Plain Basin's water. And here's the best part. They don't pay a single cent for it. Not $1. They're pumping enough water for 90,000 homes. Shipping it overseas to feed Saudi cattle. And Arizona doesn't charge them anything. Meanwhile, state monitoring stations show water levels have dropped 40 to 140 feet in just a decade near Fondo Monte operations. Local residents are watching their wells die while foreign companies drain the aquifer for profit. There's a church near the Fondo Monte farms that has been without water for 3 to 5 years. A church where people gather to worship. No running water for half a decade, while alfalfa fields get irrigated right next door. Retirees have spent $40,000 drilling new wells, only to watch them fail within a few years, as the water table drops. Some people have just given up and abandoned their homes rather than keep fighting. Governor Katie Hobbs terminated some of Fondo Monte state land leases in 2023. Sounds like progress, right? Except the company just keeps operating on private land. They drilled new wells as recently as 2024. Because in 80% of Arizona, there are no laws limiting groundwater pumping. You can drill as deep as you want, pump as much as you want, with virtually no oversight, no permits required, no limits on usage. This creates a nightmare scenario where whoever has the money to drill the deepest wins. Small homeowners with shallow wells lose. Retirees on fixed incomes lose. Churches and schools lose. Big agricultural corporations win everything. Cities across the Phoenix metro area are spending tens of millions of dollars for tiny amounts of groundwater, just to enable new housing developments. Developments that probably shouldn't exist in the first place. In Pinal County, the state allocated $20 million to drill more wells in an aquifer that was pumped dry decades ago. Local officials are completely baffled. One irrigation board member asked why they're pumping dry an aquifer again. The Arizona Department of Water Resources established a $1 billion Water Infrastructure Finance Authority Fund. $1 billion. That sounds like a massive investment. But it's still just a drop in the bucket. Because the fundamental problem isn't a lack of infrastructure, it's a lack of water. You can build all the pipes and wells you want, but if there's no water to move through them, it doesn't matter. And developers are still finding ways around even the weak regulations that do exist. There's something called the wildcat subdivision loophole, and it's been creating water-insecure communities for decades. Under Arizona law, developers must prove a 100-year water supply for projects with 6 or more homes. That sounds reasonable. Except there's a massive loophole that developers exploit constantly. If they split land into 5 or fewer lots, this requirement completely vanishes. No proof of water needed. No assured supply. Nothing. Just sell the land and let the buyers figure it out later. Thousands of homes have been built using this loophole. Communities with no assured water supply. No long-term plan. Just houses in the desert sold to families who had no idea what they were getting into. Rio Verde Foothills is the poster child for this problem, but it's far from the only community affected. These wildcat subdivisions exist all over Arizona, ticking time bombs waiting for wells to run dry. Efforts to close this loophole have repeatedly failed in the state legislature. Some lawmakers have even proposed weakening existing water standards, opening the door for even more development in areas with no water. Because real estate development is incredibly profitable in Arizona, developers make millions selling desert properties to people from California and other states. Those buyers don't realize they're moving somewhere with no guaranteed water future. And now those same developers are fighting back against the regulations that do exist. The powerful developer lobby has filed a lawsuit to overturn Arizona's 2023 development freeze around Phoenix. The Goldwater Institute, funded by real estate interests, is leading the charge. They argue that the state's groundwater modeling is flawed. That certificates should be issued based on water directly beneath individual properties. Think about how insane that argument is. They want to treat groundwater like it belongs to whoever owns the land above it, even though groundwater flows through entire basins. Pumping in one spot affects everyone around it. If they win this lawsuit, it could set a legal precedent that makes Arizona's water crisis even worse. It would essentially say that shared basin resources should be managed individually, which makes no scientific sense. State officials are calling it a shameless partisan attack by bad actor developers. Developers trying to get short-term profits by pumping water out from under Arizona families and farmers. And they might actually succeed. Because this is ultimately about money versus reality. Developers can make millions in the short term, but the long-term consequences fall on residents who will still be living there when the wells run dry. Let's step back and look at the bigger picture here. Arizona represents something much larger than just a regional water crisis. This is a preview of what's coming for the entire American West. Climate change is making the region hotter and drier every year. The mega drought shows no signs of ending. Some scientists think this isn't even a drought anymore. This might just be the new normal climate. Decades of unchecked growth and agricultural pumping have overdrafted aquifers to the point where some may never recover. Even if it started raining tomorrow, the damage is already done. Some aquifers are gone forever. And this isn't just happening in Arizona. Nevada is facing similar problems. California's Central Valley has seen land sink 28 feet in some areas from groundwater pumping. Utah is running out of water too. 40 million people depend on the Colorado River. That river is shrinking. Lake Mead has dropped so low that bodies from decades ago are being exposed. Water intake pipes are at risk of becoming useless. The entire Southwest economy was built on a fantasy. The fantasy that you could just keep growing forever in a desert. That technology and infrastructure would somehow create water from nothing. That boom would never turn to bust. But physics doesn't care about economic growth. You cannot grow more people and more crops than the water supply can support. Eventually the bill comes due, and Arizona is getting that bill right now. The cost is being paid in $24,000 hookup fees, in $40,000 well replacements that fail within years, in $12 million infrastructure projects that barely help, in families abandoning their homes. These aren't just statistics. These are real people whose lives are being destroyed. Retirees who saved their whole lives to buy a home in the desert. Young families who thought they were investing in their future. Small farmers whose families have worked the same land for generations. They're being forced out by industrial agriculture and foreign corporations that can afford to drill deeper, to pump more, to outlast everyone else. Churches that have served communities for decades sit dry while corporate farms grow alfalfa for overseas cattle. The priorities here are completely backward. Profits are being prioritized over people, export crops over local communities. And the money being spent is staggering. $1 billion state funds, $20 million for failed well projects, $12 million for temporary fixes, hundreds of millions in federal conservation money. For what? All of this spending isn't solving the problem. It's just delaying the inevitable. Buying time, kicking the can down the road, hoping that somehow something will change before the entire system collapses completely. But hope isn't a strategy, and money can't create water. Arizona is learning this lesson the hard way. The state had decades to get this right, to implement real regulations, to limit pumping, to plan for sustainability. Instead, they chose unlimited growth. They chose to let developers and agricultural corporations do whatever they wanted. They chose short-term profits over long-term survival, and now it's too late to undo the damage. The aquifers are depleted. The Colorado River is over-allocated. The climate is getting worse, and millions of people are living in places that cannot sustainably support them. This is the legacy of poor planning and greed. Some experts say, Arizona needs to fundamentally rethink its entire approach to water. Stop allowing unlimited pumping. Close the subdivision loopholes. Restrict agricultural water use. Halt development in water-scarce areas completely. But that would require political courage. That doesn't seem to exist. It would mean telling developers no. Telling agricultural corporations they can't pump unlimited water. Telling residents that growth has limits. That's not popular. So instead, they keep spending money on infrastructure that doesn't address the core problem. They keep drilling deeper wells into aquifers that are already depleted. They keep building homes that shouldn't exist. And every day the situation gets worse. Water tables drop another inch. Another well runs dry. Another family faces impossible choices. Another community realizes the promises they were sold were lies. The Rio Verde residents, who paid $800,000 for their homes, are now paying more for water than their mortgage. That's not a sustainable situation. Those property values are going to crash. Who wants to buy a house where water costs $6,000 a year, where you pay $24,000 just to hook up, where there's no guarantee the water will even keep flowing? This is creating a real estate disaster in slow motion. As more communities lose water access, property values will plummet. Banks will stop giving mortgages. Insurance companies will pull out. Entire neighborhoods could become worthless. And it's not just residential properties. Commercial real estate depends on water too. Hotels, restaurants, office buildings. They all need reliable water. What happens when that reliability disappears? Arizona's economy has been built on growth, construction jobs, real estate sales, property taxes from new developments, service industry jobs supporting new residents. All of that grinds to a halt when you run out of water. The 2023 development freeze was just the beginning. More restrictions are coming. They have to. Because the alternative is even worse. The alternative is a complete catastrophic collapse of the water system. But restrictions alone won't fix the damage already done. The aquifers that have been depleted won't refill in our lifetimes. Maybe not in our children's lifetimes. The water that's gone is gone. This means Arizona is facing a future where millions of people live in a place that cannot support them, where basic necessities like water become luxury items, where inequality is measured in gallons per month. The wealthy will be fine. They can afford $6,000 water bills. They can afford $24,000 hookup fees. They can afford to leave if things get bad enough. It's everyone else who suffers. Lower income families, retirees on fixed incomes, small farmers, working class communities. They're the ones who will bear the cost. They're the ones who will lose their homes. their livelihoods, their futures. And this pattern is playing out across the West. California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado. Every state that depends on Colorado River water or groundwater is facing some version of this crisis. The question isn't whether this gets worse. It will. The question is how bad it gets before real action is taken. How many families have to abandon their homes? How many communities have to go dry? The technology exists to manage water sustainably. Other desert regions around the world do it. Israel, Australia, they've figured out how to thrive in dry climates, but it requires regulation, planning, limits on growth. Arizona has shown it's unwilling or unable to implement those kinds of restrictions. The political will doesn't exist. The developer lobby is too powerful. The agricultural interests are too entrenched. Change seems impossible. So the money keeps flowing. 1 billion here, 20 million there, 12 million for this project, hundreds of millions for that program. All of it treating symptoms while the disease spreads. The bottom line is simple but brutal. Arizona is trapped in a crisis of its own making. Decades of poor decisions have created a situation where millions of dollars can't buy a solution, because the solution requires water. And the water isn't there. It was pumped out decades ago, sold to developers and farmers who knew it couldn't last, used to build cities and grow crops in a place that was never meant to support them. This is the story of how Arizona became ground zero for America's water crisis, and why the billions being spent may be too little too late. Because in the desert Southwest, you can't solve water scarcity by writing bigger checks.